ولا تعجل بالقرآن من قبل أن يقضى إليك وحيه وقل رب زدني علما.
إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا وسيئات أعمالنا. من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له، وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. أما بعد. So a few weeks ago we did a lecture regarding the etiquettes of a student of knowledge, and also an encouragement to seek knowledge, and that was taken from the opening sections of the Manzumah of Al-Ilbīrī. And so today we carry on reading from that poem, reading some of the lines of that poem where he encourages the student of knowledge, a person, to gain knowledge, to strive in seeking that knowledge, and the etiquettes that the student of knowledge should have. So perhaps we arrived somewhere in the region of maybe line 20 or so, where he mentions, or 16 will begin from, وَلَا أَلْهَاكَ عَنْهُ أَنِيقُ رَوْضٍ وَلَا خِدْرٌ بِزِينَتِهَا كَلِفْتَا فَقُوتُ الرُّوحِ أَرْوَاحُ الْمَعَانِي وَلَيْسَ بِأَنْ طَعِمْتَ وَلَا شَرِبْتَ. Here he mentions that a student of knowledge, a person who's serious about seeking knowledge, then that type of individual should not make his priority the worldly matters, should not make his priority going out and going on picnics and going on holidays and using his time on vacations. That should not be the priority of a person. There is no harm in doing so occasionally, of course, that a person takes his family out for a picnic or into the grass and the fields and the parks. There is no prohibition in that, but he is saying that a person should not become dragged away by those affairs. That every day it is going to the park, every day it is going for walks in the hills, every day out into the beauty. It is not that you end up spending all of your time on those types of affairs, because those types of affairs, and even that which is more important than them, food and drink, even when it comes to that, then the reality is this knowledge is of greater importance, because the food and the drink, that is provision for the body of a person. Food and drink is provision for the body of a person, whereas this knowledge, it is provision for the heart of an individual. قوت الروح al-ilm, that provision and sustenance of the soul of the person, then what it is this knowledge. The food and drink sustains his body, but the knowledge sustains his heart. فواظبه وخذ بالجد فيه فإن أعطاكه الله انتفعت. So strive continuously. فواظبه, persist upon that path, upon the path of seeking knowledge. Persist upon that path. وَخُذْ بِالْجِدِّ فِيهِ, and be earnest be earnest upon that path. Be resolute upon that path. Be serious and firm and focused upon that path of seeking knowledge. Because when a person has that earnestness, that seriousness, that focus, that resoluteness, that's what brings about the fruits for a person. But the opposite, laziness, that's what brings about deprivation for a person. When a person strives, then he receives the fruits of that. But when a person is lazy, then all he gets is deprivation. Al-Hurman. Al-Jiddu bil-Jidd, wal-Hurmanu bil-Kasl. When you strive, then you gain the rewards of that striving. And when you are lazy, then all you have is deprivation. You are deprived of goodness, deprived of knowledge. And so a person should ponder upon the point being made there, that gaining knowledge, seeking knowledge, it comes with striving and earnestness upon the path, not with laziness. An individual who wants to gain knowledge but he's lazy, he cannot put the effort into it, or he is distracted by the beauties of the world, then that type of individual is not going to gain the reality of knowledge. So al-Jiddu bil-Jidd wal-Hurmanu bil-Kasl. And then he mentions, فَإِنْ أَعْطَاكَهُ اللَّهُ انْتَفَعْتَ. That if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives you that knowledge, you strive and you work hard and you are earnest and persistent, and Allah blesses you with that knowledge, then certainly you will benefit from that. And take note of what he says here. فَإِنْ أَعْطَاكَهُ اللَّهُ. If Allah gives you that knowledge, meaning it's not something you are going to acquire for yourself independently, rather it is something that Allah bestows upon you. It is something that Allah bestows upon you. Minna ilahiyya. This ilm, it is an endowment, something you are given, a bestowment upon you from Allah, a virtue that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives to an individual. And that's why it mentions in the Quran, وَقُلْ رَبِّ زِدْنِي عِلْمًا. And say, O my Lord, increase me in knowledge. Increase me in knowledge. An individual makes dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bestows upon him this knowledge and gives him the virtue of this knowledge and understanding. Hence the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam mentioned in the hadith, مَنْ يُرِدِ اللَّهُ بِهِ خَيْرًا يُفَقِّهُ فِي الدِّينِ. Whomsoever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants goodness for, then Allah gives him knowledge and understanding, comprehension of this religion. So he says, فَإِنْ أَعْطَاكَهُ اللَّهُ انْتَفَعْتَ. That if Allah gives you that knowledge, if Allah gives you that virtue, bestows it upon you, then you will certainly benefit from that. Similarly, Allah mentioned in the Quran, وَعَلَّمَكَ مَا لَمْ تَكُنْ تَعْلَمُ. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala taught you that which you did not know. Allah taught you that which you did not know. So this knowledge, it is a blessing from Allah upon an individual. It is a virtue that Allah gives to an individual. A person should not think that he is smart, that he is intelligent, that he is clever and he can read and understand and gain knowledge because of his smartness and his intelligence. That is not how a person thinks. Rather, all of that which you've been given, then it is a blessing from Allah. Hence you make dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bestows upon you this knowledge. And so the scholars have said, Al-ilmu ihtaj al-isti'ana billah wa ma'ahu al-jid wal-ijtihad wa badl al-asbab. To gain knowledge, it requires that you seek aid and assistance from Allah and then persist and take the means and strive upon the path. It requires that you seek aid and assistance from Allah in gaining the knowledge and then strive upon the path and take the means to that knowledge. In the hadith, the Prophet ﷺ mentioned, احرص على ما ينفعك واستعن بالله ولا تعجز. Strive for that which benefits you. احرص على ما ينفعك. Strive upon that which will benefit you. واستعن بالله. And seek aid and assistance from Allah. ولا تعجز. And do not become feeble and weak and lazy, but strive, be earnest and persist upon that pathway. واستعن بالله. And seek the aid and assistance from Allah in gaining that knowledge. Scholars have often mentioned that from the means of treading upon that pathway, because a person may make dua, seek aid and assistance from Allah, but then how does he take the pathway himself? The scholars have mentioned from amongst the means of then treading upon the pathway yourself is to be serious in that seeking of knowledge by, for example, bringing your pens and pads to the classes. That is from the means of an individual actually striving and persisting and showing that focus in gaining that knowledge. It is from that, it shows that the individual is striving, that you bring the pen and the pad and you make the notes. That is from the affairs of striving. So that's why he says, فَإِنْ أَعْطَاكَهُ اللَّهُ, that if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives you that knowledge, انتفعت, you will certainly benefit from it. And you see that is the fruit of knowledge. The one who truly gains the knowledge and understands it, then you see it in his behavior, in his character, in his practice, in his worship. You see that in the scholars as examples, those who have been given knowledge. You see their character and how they behave. You see their advice that they give to the ummah. You see how they nurture those who come to them, how they teach and give the tarbiyah to their students. You see that from the people of knowledge, Ahlul Ilm. They have indeed benefited from the knowledge Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has bestowed upon them. So an individual who has knowledge, then what is expected is that he should benefit from his knowledge. And that should reflect in the character of an individual, in the behavior of an individual, in his mannerisms, in his worship, in his interactions, his dealings, in his affairs. It reflects in him the fact that he has knowledge. As for an individual who claims knowledge and yet behaves in the worst of manners and characters and behaviors, then what has he benefited from his knowledge? So he says here, if Allah bestows that upon you, you will benefit from that. But then he says, وَإِنْ أُعْطِيتَ فِيهِ طَوِيلَ بَاعٍ أو باعِ وقال الناس إنك قد علمت فلا تأمن سؤال الله عنه بتوبيخ علمت فهل عملت. He now says, if you are then bestowed with knowledge, you are bestowed with knowledge, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blesses you with knowledge. You are given the tawila ba', that you've been given understanding and recognition and comprehension of this knowledge, good ability in this knowledge. وَقَالَ النَّاسُ إِنَّكَ قَدْ عَلِمْتَ, and the people begin to say, indeed, you are knowledgeable. The people begin to say of you that you are a person of knowledge, and they begin to recognize of you that you are a person of knowledge. They begin to comprehend that you have an understanding and ability with this knowledge, and they begin to notice that and say that regarding you. Then remember what? فَلَا تَأْمَنْ سُؤَالَ اللَّهِ بِتَوْبِيخ. Do not, in that situation, the people are now praising you and recognizing you as a person of knowledge, then do not start to feel comfortable. Do not think that you are now a person of knowledge and everybody knows, and you start to feel safe and secure. Do not feel secure and safe from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asking you, reprimanding you that you had knowledge. So how did you act upon your knowledge? Do not feel safe that the people now raise you and point towards you, a person of knowledge. Do not feel safe from the question that Allah will ask you, that you were given this knowledge, what did you do with this knowledge? Did you act upon your knowledge? قَدْ عَلِمْتَ فَهَلْ عَمِلْتَ. You had the knowledge, so did you act upon your knowledge? And this is the reality of differentiating between somebody who has benefited from his knowledge and the one who has not. The one who acts upon his knowledge, acts upon the Quran and the Sunnah and the following of the methodology of the Salaf, he is benefiting from his knowledge and he has acted upon his knowledge. But for the one who claims the knowledge but does not practice that knowledge and does not act upon that knowledge, then what has he done with his knowledge? Alimta. From that question you will be given, you had knowledge, did you act upon your knowledge? And that's why it is mentioned that a person should never become deceived by himself. A person should never think that he is smarter than others and more intelligent than others, cleverer than others. لا تغتر بنفسك. Do not become deceived by yourself. Do not become deceived thinking you are superior. لا تغتر بنفسك. And that's why it is mentioned also in the Quran, إِنَّمَا يَخْشَى اللَّهَ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ الْعُلَمَاءُ. That the ones who truly fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from His servants are the people of knowledge. Those who have knowledge, they are the ones who recognize who their Lord is. And they are the ones who truly fear their Lord. That's the reality of the one who has knowledge and acts upon it. Not the one who becomes deceived by himself, مَغْرُورٌ بِنَفْسِهِ, thinking that he is now superior, he knows better than everybody else. He is the one who everyone should listen to and everyone should come back to. That is not the way of a student of knowledge. That is not the way of a person of knowledge. And that's why you see the scholars with their humbleness, the humbleness that the scholars have in recognition of this affair, that you do not become deceived with the knowledge you have. And some of the scholars studying for 50, 60, 70 years of their lives, they've been going through the Quran and the Sunnah and the level of knowledge they have, and yet you will see the humbleness from them, the humility and modesty of the scholars. Just the other day we were mentioning the example of a Sheikh Ali Nasir al-Faqihi, from the most senior scholars of Medina, from the eldest, from the oldest of the scholars of Medina. And yet a young student, barely 50, 60, 70 years younger than the Sheikh, barely 20 years old maybe, comes and asks the Sheikh a question, and the Sheikh says to him, go to another Sheikh. Go to a Sheikh Abdul Muhsin Abbad. He's more knowledgeable in hadith. How often do you see that amongst the youngsters? And when I say youngsters, I mean everybody besides the elder scholars. All of the so-called sheikhs that you see on YouTube now. If you go now and you ask a question, how many times will they say, I don't know, but such and such, he definitely has knowledge of these affairs. Go and ask him. Now, for the people to do that, it's like an embarrassment for them, humiliation for them. And they don't know the position of Al-Imam Malik, where it's mentioned in one of the narrations when the man came to him with the 40 questions. In one of the versions it says that Al-Imam Malik only answered 4 of them. In one of them, 8 of them. And the rest of them, the man said, what about the rest of them? I was sent from such and such a land, from Iraq, from all of that long distance. And I came all the way here to ask you. They sent me to you. They said, go to Al-Imam Malik to ask these questions. I came all that way to get the answers from you, to take them back to my people and tell them, what can I say to them? You've only answered 4 or 6 or 8 out of 40. Al-Imam Malik said to him, go and tell them that Al-Imam Malik said he doesn't know the answer. Go and tell them. Tell them Al-Imam Malik said I don't know the answer to them. This is the reality of the scholars. This is the humility and the modesty of the scholars. Not that a person becomes deceived by himself. As you see the people these days, 2 or 3 years abroad here and there, and now coming back as though they are the mufti of the lands. Mufti of the lands. Every question that comes, they have an answer. MashaAllah. Every question that comes, they have an answer. There's no such thing as I don't know the answer to that one. They mention also regarding the companions. The companions, imagine the companions of the Prophet ﷺ and the Salaf as a whole. It is mentioned about them that they would love to not have to answer the questions. It's mentioned in some of the narrations, if one of them was asked a question, he would say, go and ask such and such, another one of the companions or from the Salaf. So then the person will go to him. He would say, go and ask such and such, another companion or from one of the Salaf. So the person will go to him. He would say, no, go to such and such, he's more knowledgeable, etc. Ask him. He would go to him. And that person in the end would send him back to the first one. He's gone round in a circle. Nobody wants to be the one answering the question. Nobody wants to be the one giving the fatwa to him. Nowadays it's the opposite. Everybody wants to be the one who answers the question. Meaning the one who wants to give the fatwa. The one who wants to be the knowledgeable one. Everybody wants to position themselves there. There's a big difference between the etiquettes of the Salaf and the ulama, Ahlul Ilm, the scholars throughout history, and from some of the affairs that you see of the people today. And that's why it is very important to learn the mannerisms of a student of knowledge, to learn the etiquettes of a student of knowledge. And you should not ignore these things, because many people do not study these affairs. Many people do not study the etiquettes of a student of knowledge. Because people, when they think about knowledge, they think, okay, I've got to study fiqh, kitab al-tahara, kitab al-salah, etc. Of course, excellent. And I've got to study aqidah, of course, absolutely. All of those different topics, seerah, tafsir, yes. But many people, they don't recognize and they don't realize this topic of the student of knowledge and the etiquettes of seeking knowledge and the etiquettes of a talib al-ilm. And so you notice in many of them, perhaps even if they've gained some knowledge in some of those fields, they have a big deficiency in their character as a talib al-ilm, perhaps, in their character in delivery and interaction with people, perhaps. And that may be due to a deficiency in this field. Hence the Salaf, they used to say, they would begin with this affair. They would begin by learning the mannerisms of their shaykh, and they would benefit from that even before they benefited from his knowledge. They would say they benefited from the character and the mannerism and being with the shaykh, learning from him, even before they learnt the actual knowledge from the shaykh. So these affairs are important, and that's why he mentions here, do not feel safe all of a sudden if people start saying, MashaAllah, he's a person of knowledge, he's a talib al-ilm. Do not suddenly start feeling safe and secure that you're a talib al-ilm now. Do not feel secure from the questioning of Allah that you had this knowledge and what did you do with this knowledge. فَرَأْسُ الْعِلْمِ تَقْوَى اللَّهِ حَقًّا وَلَيْسَ بِأَنْ يُقَالْ لَقَدْ رَأِسْتَا أو رَأَسْتَا. Because the reality of knowledge is the taqwa of Allah. That you have the taqwa, you fulfill the commandments of Allah, and you stay away from the prohibitions of Allah. That's the reality of knowledge. Not وَلَيْسَ بِأَنْ يُقَالْ لَقَدْ رَأَسْتَ. It is not that the people say you are now high up, he's a talib al-ilm, he is elevated. It is not about the fact that people elevate you. That's not the reality of knowledge. Do not be deceived into thinking that is knowledge. Now the people recognize me as a talib, and they recognize me as somebody with knowledge, and I've memorized and I've done this, and they've given you some status. That status is not the reality of knowledge. A person who thinks that's what knowledge is, they have not understood the very beginnings of knowledge. Rather, knowledge, he says here, رَأْسَ الْعِلْمِ تَقْوَى اللَّهِ حَقًّا. The reality of knowledge, the head of that knowledge is the taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That a person recognizes the meaning of this knowledge and the implementation of that knowledge. وَأَفْضَلُ ثَوْبِكَ الْإِحْسَانُ. Now remember, we mentioned that one of the explanations regarding this poem was that Abu Bakr was writing to a friend of his who had oppressed him. That friend of his had said some bad things about him. And so instead of replying back and refuting him, which is the norm these days, instead of replying back and just refuting and angry and this and that, he wrote this poem as a reminder to him. As a reminder to him. Because that person, they say some of the scholars, had oppressed Abu Bakr, the author. Or Abu Bakr was that individual who had oppressed the author. So the author Al-Ilbīrī was reminding that individual. So he says to him, وَأَفْضَلُ ثَوْبِكَ الْإِحْسَانُ. That the best of your garments are goodness. That when you're upon goodness and you're behaving with everybody upon goodness, that's when you are at your best. You're at your best when you demonstrate the goodness to the people. أفضل ثوبك الإحسان لكن نرى ثوب الإساءة قد لبستا. Your best state, the best of you, is when you're wearing your garments of goodness. That is the best, when you behave with goodness and righteousness. But we see, he says, we see though you have put on a garment of badness. The garment of goodness is what is best for you. But we see now, meaning in your behavior and the speech you've made against me, we see that you have put on a garment of badness. So, Then he mentions, إذا ما لم يفدك العلم خيرا فخير منه أن لو قد جهلت. So now he's highlighting to him, the best state for you is when you wear your garments of goodness. You behave properly and good with the people with etiquette and manners. But we see that currently in what you're doing, in the speech that you're making against me basically, as he was saying in the poem, or the background to it, in that action of yours, you have put on a garment of badness. That is a garment of evil, a garment that is no good. Behaving in this way and speaking bad of your brother in this way and oppressing him in this way. Because that is what the scholars say one of the backgrounds to the poem was. Somebody had oppressed him and he wrote the poem to advise that person. So he says, we see that you've put on this garment of badness. This garment of badness, when in reality, the garment of goodness is when you are at your best. That's what you should be upon. So then he says, إِذَا لَمْ يُفِدْكَ الْعِلْمُ خَيْرًا. So if that's the case, you're wearing this garment of badness and this is how you want to behave, then in that case, if your knowledge is not going to benefit you, because if you're wearing the garment of badness and behaving in this way, then clearly you are not benefiting from the knowledge you have. You are not benefiting and practicing the knowledge you have. So if your knowledge is not going to benefit you and not going to bring goodness from you, then it's better for خَيْرٌ مِنْهُ أَنْ لَوْ قَدْ جَهِلْتَ. Then it would be better for you to be ignorant. Better for you to have remained ignorant than to be knowledgeable and know how to behave but still behave badly. To have knowledge and to know how your etiquette should be and your character should be, and still you put on this garment of badness towards me. Better that you were ignorant in that case. Better you were ignorant than to have knowledge and behave in this bad way upon knowledge. وَإِنْ أَلْقَاكَ فَهْمُكَ فِي مَهَاوٍ فَلَيْتَكَ ثُمَّ لَيْتَكَ مَا فَهِمْتَ. And if your understanding and your knowledge throws you into these pitfalls, meaning even with your knowledge, you still end up wearing this garment of badness and throwing yourself into this hole. If that's what your knowledge does for you, فَلَيْتَكَ ثُمَّ لَيْتَكَ مَا فَهِمْتَ. Then if only you hadn't understood in the first place. If that's what your understanding has led you to do, to put on this garment of badness against me, then if only you hadn't understood in the first place, if only you didn't have knowledge in the first place. Because what are you doing with your knowledge right now then? What are you doing with this evil behavior or oppression or words that are false against me? That's what some of the scholars say the background to this was. So then he says to him, ستجني من ثمار العجز جهلا وتصغر في العيون إذا كبرت. That if you continue upon this way, if you continue upon this method, then you will reap the rewards of your laziness and the fruits of your lack of perseverance and lack of focus and time into knowledge, and instead in this behavior that you're engaged in. If that's what you do, then your lack of focus on knowledge instead upon laziness and ignorance and evil, then you will reap the fruits of that. And what will be the fruits of that? تَصْغُرُ فِي الْعُيُونِ إِذَا كَبِرْتَ. That even if you become older, you will become smaller in the eyes of the people. Even if you become older, you become bigger, you will actually become smaller in the eyes of the people. If you continue upon this method of ignorance, no focus on knowledge and striving upon the methodology of the talib al-ilm, you continue upon the way of the jahil, then even if you get older where you're becoming smaller in the eyes of the people. تَصْغُرُ فِي الْعُيُونِ إِذَا كَبِرْتَ. And that's why they say a jahil, a person like that who has no focus on learning, studying religion, then وُجُودُهُ كَعَدَمِهِ, a person who is ignorant in that way, then his presence is as good as not being present. That's why they say a person who is ignorant, even when he's alive, it's as though he's not even there. Ignorant, jahil, of no benefit or use. Even when he's alive, as though he's not even there. But a person of knowledge, even after he dies and he's not physically actually there, he is still there amongst the people. Because the people still remember him, and they still remember his knowledge, and his knowledge is still passed on, and his books are still taught. So the person of knowledge, even when he's physically gone, is still remembered amongst the people. But a jahil, even when he's physically there, is not remembered amongst the people. And then he mentions, وَتُفْقَدُ إِن جَهِلْتَ وَأَنْتَ بَاقٍ وَتُوجَدُ إِن عَلِمْتَ وَلَوْ فُقِدْتَ. That's what we just mentioned, that you will be forgotten if you are ignorant, even when you're there. Even when you're there, you will be forgotten, of no consequence, of no value. But if you are a person of knowledge, then you will be found, you will be remembered, even if you go. Meaning, even if you die, even if you're not there physically, then you will still be remembered amongst the people, in the gatherings of the people. The knowledge will still be passed on and learnt and taught. And then he says to him, because these types of things, this type of advice, when you give it to a person, many times a person may not accept. He will say, no, I'm okay, this doesn't apply to me, etc., etc. Many a time, perhaps from some problem that a person has in his heart, he may not accept the advice when you give it to them. So then he says to him, وَتَذْكُرُ قَوْلَتِي لَكَ بَعْدَ حِينٍ إِذَا حَقًّا بِهَا يَوْمًا عَمِلْتَ. He says to him, one day you will remember this advice. One day you will remember what I'm telling you now. If indeed you one day act upon it. Meaning, if one day you act upon what I tell you, then what he's telling him, all of those things will occur. He will see the fruits of knowledge if he acts upon that and learns and strives. He will see the goodness when he wears the garment of goodness instead of the garment of badness. So he says, truly, if you one day do what I'm telling you, then that day, one day, you'll remember this advice I gave you. One day, after a while, one day, you'll remember this, what I'm telling you, if indeed you practice it. وَإِنْ أَهْمَلْتَهَا وَنَبَذْتَ نُصْحًا وَمِلْتَ إِلَى حُطَامٍ قَدْ جَمَعْتَ فَسَوْفَ تَعُضُّ مِنْ نَدَمٍ عَلَيْهَا وَمَا تُغْنِي النَّدَامَةُ إِنْ نَدِمْتَ. But then he says, however, if you ignore and neglect what I'm telling you, if you ignore and neglect this advice and you throw it away, you ignore and neglect what I'm telling you, this advice, and you throw it away, and instead you chase after those worldly affairs and the other matters outside of knowledge, then فَسَوْفَ تَعُضُّ مِن نَدَمٍ عَلَيْهَا. That then, at that time, you will certainly bite your tongue in regret. You will certainly be in regret upon it. وَمَا تُغْنِي النَّدَامَةُ إِن نَدِمْتَ. And then, when you are in that state of regret, it doesn't benefit you anything. Regret at that time then, regret in the end, then that doesn't benefit you. You've wasted all of your time. Regretting it at the end isn't going to bring back that time. At that time then, if you ignore all of this advice and you carry upon your destructive pathway, then one day you'll come to regret it. But when you do, that regret won't benefit you. That regret won't do anything good for you. Then you've wasted your time. It's gone. You're not going to be able to get the time back then. إذا أبصرت صحبك في سماء قد ارتفعوا عليك وقد سفلت. And you see that your colleagues, they have raised up into the skies and you are still low down in the earth. Meaning they are striving upon طلب العلم. They are striving upon seeking knowledge and they have raised up with that knowledge and understanding. But you still down in the ground doing nothing, laziness, no effort, no studying. فراجعها ودع عنك الهوينا فما بالبطء تدرك ما طلبتا. So then, get a hold of yourself. Get a hold of yourself and leave this laziness and go upon that path of seeking knowledge with earnestness. Because with laziness and being slow about things, then that's not how you will gain knowledge. And that's why they used to say that this knowledge, in أعطيته بعضك لم يعطيك شيئا وإن أعطيته كلك أعطاك بعضه. This knowledge, if you give your 100% effort to it, it will give you a little bit back. If you give this knowledge 100%, everything you've got, you give it to this knowledge, to gain this knowledge, then you'll get a little bit back. Knowledge will give you a little bit. But if you don't give 100%, you give anything less than 100% into this knowledge, knowledge will give you nothing back. There is no trade in knowledge. It is either you put 100% focus in there to get something from that knowledge, or if you're only going to do 50%, 60% half-heartedly here and there, knowledge will give you nothing back in that way. That's what the Salaf used to mention. وَلَا تَخْتَلْ بِمَالِكَ وَالْهَ عَنْهُ فَلَيْسَ الْمَالُ إِلَّا مَا عَلِمْتَ. And then he mentions regarding the wealth, and do not be deceived by the wealth. The reality of your wealth, the reality of wealth is knowledge and what you know. That knowledge is the reality of your wealth, not the other wealth. وَلَيْسَ لِجَاهِلٍ فِي النَّاسِ مُغْنٍ وَلَوْ مُلْكُ الْعِرَاقِ لَهُ تَأَتَّى. And then here he says that a person who is ignorant, then there is nobody who is able to suffice him or help him from the people. There is nobody who will be able to suffice or help an individual who is ignorant. وَلَوْ مُلْكُ الْعِرَاقِ لَهُ تَأَتَّى. Even if the kingdom of Iraq was at his feet, even if he had everything, a jahil wouldn't be able to do anything. A jahil wouldn't be sufficed with anything. None of that will be of any benefit in reality. The only benefit is the knowledge, because the knowledge teaches you how to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. سينطق عنك علمك في ملأ ويكتب عنك يوما إن كتمت وما يغنيك تشييد المباني إذا بالجهل نفسك قد هدمت. And then he says that if a person, or rather, that you will be spoken about via your knowledge. Via your knowledge you will be spoken about. Because of your knowledge you will be spoken about amongst the people. And you will be written about even when you are gone or it is hidden. And that is in reference to the scholars. Even after they go, the people of knowledge, they are remembered, and their knowledge is still written and recorded, and books and taught. All of that still occurs. وَمَا يُغْنِيكَ تَشْيِيدُ الْمَبَانِ. And it won't benefit you building all these buildings. That a person builds lots of properties for himself, builds lots of houses for himself. He says all of that type of thing, none of that will benefit you. إِذَا بِالْجَهْلِ نَفْسَكَ قَدْ هَدَمْتَ. If indeed through ignorance you have destroyed yourself anyway. Building all these buildings and properties and wealth, none of that will benefit you. None of that construction will benefit you if you have already destroyed yourself through ignorance. So it's an example being given about building and destruction. Building these buildings, constructing them will not benefit you if you have already destroyed yourself through ignorance. You have demolished yourself through ignorance. Building buildings and properties is of no benefit then. جعلت المال فوق العلم جهلا لعمرك في القضية ما عدلت. That you have made knowledge, that you have made wealth superior over and above knowledge. You have made wealth as your priority, superior over and above knowledge. And that is a great injustice that you have done in the affair. A great injustice you have done. You have not been just whatsoever by prioritizing wealth over knowledge. Prioritizing the world and its gains over knowledge. You have not done any justice in giving that priority in your life. وبينهما بنص الوحي بون ستعلمه إذا طاح قرأت. And he says between them there is a huge difference. Between those matters of wealth and knowledge and where the focus and priority should be, there is a huge difference between those priorities, which the Quran has informed us of. And he says, read Surah Taha. If you read that, you will come to understand some level of difference between where the priority should be. لَإِنْ رَفَعَ الْغَنِيُّ لِوَاءَ مَالٍ لَأَنْتَ لِوَاءَ عِلْمِكَ قَدْ رَفَعْتَ. If a rich person raises the banner of his wealth, then you are raising the banner of your knowledge. Knowledge, which is the means to worshipping Allah, the means to the pleasure of Allah. That's the banner you are raising, the banner of knowledge. As for the rich person, he's raising the banner of his wealth. If the rich person raises the banner of his wealth, then indeed لَأَنْتَ لِوَاءَ عِلْمِكَ قَدْ رَفَعْتَ. You are raising the banner of your knowledge. لَإِنْ جَلَسَ الْغَنِيُّ عَلَى الْحَشَايَا لَأَنْتَ عَلَى الْكَوَاكِبِ قَدْ جَلَسْتَ. That if the rich person, the wealthy and rich individual sits upon his thrones, sits upon a throne, then you with your knowledge are sitting upon the stars. Even if a rich person with all his wealth sits upon his throne, you with your knowledge are raised that you are sitting above the stars. And that we mentioned before, how Allah raises a person of knowledge. هل يستوي الذين يعلمون والذين لا يعلمون? Can they be equal, the ones who know, have knowledge, and the ones who do not? Certainly they cannot be equal. The ones who have knowledge and the ones who do not have knowledge. As Shaykh Al-Uthaymeen rahimahullah ta'ala mentioned, of course they cannot be equal. The ones with knowledge are superior to the ones who do not have knowledge. And that's why Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala mentioned the example of the dogs. That a knowledgeable dog is superior to a jahil dog. Even in the dogs, the knowledgeable dog is superior to the jahil dog. How do we know that? Because when it comes to the chapters of hunting, it is permissible to have a hunting dog. but there are conditions for which type of dog you're allowed to have as a hunting dog. And those conditions basically revolve around the knowledge of the dog, the understanding of the dog. When you give it an order, can it follow the order or not? When it goes and catches the prey, does it understand what to do? Knowledge. A dog that is trained and understands and has knowledge, you can have that type of dog as a hunting dog. The one that is jahil, doesn't know, goes and catches, rips up the prey, does everything. You can't have that one. So Ibn al-Qayyim said, look at that. Even in the dogs, the one with knowledge is given the priority and superiority. That one you can have as the training dog, as the hunting dog. But the ignorant dog that doesn't follow instructions or anything, doesn't know what's going on, what it's doing, you can't have that one as a hunting dog. So the trained dog, the knowledgeable dog, is superior to the jahil dog. That is in the dogs, let alone amongst the humans whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has ennobled with the revelation, the Quran and the Sunnah for us to learn and to understand. And then he says, وَإِنْ رَكِبَ الْجِيَادَ مُسَوَّمَاتٍ لَأَنْتَ مَنَاهِجَ التَّقْوَى رَكِبْتَ. And even if those rich people, they are riding upon the best of horses, riding upon those beautiful horses, the expensive, valuable horses, you are riding upon the methodologies of taqwa. You are riding upon the practice and methodology of taqwa, of obeying the commandments of Allah and staying away from the prohibitions. So even if they be riding upon their beautiful and valuable and expensive horses, you are upon the affair of taqwa. You are riding that methodology and practicing and treading upon that methodology of taqwa. وَمَهْمَ افتض أبكار الغواني فكم بكر من الحكم اقتضبتا. And then he goes on to give more examples of this same type of affair. And the point of all of this is, why is he talking about wealth in all of this? A student of knowledge, a muttaqi, a person of taqwa, does not become affected by poverty. A person should not be affected by poverty. That a person thinks, why am I in such poverty, such little finance, barely able to feed myself and my family, barely able to do this or that. A person should not become saddened or grieved by his condition in that affair. Even if you see the other people with their riches, the talib al-ilm, if he has sufficiency, he's able to look after the rights of his family, provide for his wife and provide for his children, fulfill the rights that are upon him financially. Alhamdulillah, even if he doesn't have the camels and the thrones and the horses, he fulfills the rights that are upon him and is content and patient upon the decree of Allah, and that poverty does not harm him. Just like the example of the Prophet ﷺ, we see he used to sleep on a bed made of like the grass, basically, like palm tree leaves and grass and bark, those kinds of natural things. You put them together, that's like a bed. All the grass and the palm and the bark, put it all together like that, it's a little bit soft, and you sleep on that. That was the bed of the Prophet ﷺ. So all of this section is highlighting that a student of knowledge should not become affected by wealth, going after wealth, and therefore neglecting and throwing aside his time in studying. Of course, a person balances the affair. Of course, a person needs to earn and work and fulfill the rights of his wife and children, of course. So a person does what he needs to do. He goes and works, puts in the hours every week, of course. A person needs to do that to fulfill the rights. But then outside of that, it should not be the case that a person, all he does is 90 hours a week focusing on business and trade and money. Rather, do what you need to do, what gives you sufficiency, do your business, whatever it is, and then put time aside from your schedules for the seeking of knowledge also, not to neglect that at the cost of chasing after the wealth. So then he says, وَلَيْسَ يَضُرُّكَ الْإِقْتَارُ شَيْئًا إِذَا مَا أَنْتَ رَبَّكَ قَدْ عَرَفْتَ. So now he's continuing with this affair, and he's saying that these types of things, they are not going to have an effect upon you, all of these things we're mentioning, if you don't know your Lord. If you are ignorant of your Lord, then what is wealth going to do for you? What are you going to do with all this wealth and money and chasing after it if you are ignorant of your Lord and the worship of your Lord? The reality of the benefit and the reality of your good deeds is knowing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And knowing Allah comes through knowledge. فَمَاذَا عِنْدَهُ لَكَ مِنْ جَمِيلٍ إِذَا بِفِنَاءِ طَاعَتِهِ أَنَخْتَى إِذَا بِفِنَاءِ طَاعَتِهِ أَنَخْتَى. So then he says, what will it benefit you? What will that wealth and all these things benefit you if you are devoid of the worship of Allah? What will all of that wealth benefit you if you are devoid of the worship of Allah? So all of these lines he's focusing on that point, because one of the biggest things in this world is the issue of wealth and the desire for a person to gain wealth and to chase after the wealth. That this should not be something which prevents you from the seeking of knowledge. فَقَابِلْ بِالْقَبُولِ لِنُصْحِ قَوْلِي فَإِنْ أَعْرَضْتَ عَنْهُ فَقَدْ خَسِرْتَ. So he says, accept what I'm telling you now. Accept this statement of mine and what I'm telling you and this advice, because if you turn away from it, you will certainly be in loss. Accept what I'm telling you in these affairs, because if you turn away from it, then certainly you will be in loss. وَإِنْ رَاعَيْتَهُ قَوْلًا وَفِعْلًا وَتَاجَرْتَ الْإِلَهَ بِهِ رَبِحْتَ. And if you focus on them, you do focus on these statements of mine, and you trade with them, you learn that knowledge, you practice that knowledge, you trade in it with your Lord, that's when you'll be profitable. You will be profitable with Allah if you trade in these affairs, knowledge and practice and taqwa. Trade in them, meaning learn them and practice them. If you do all of that, that's when you will gain the profitability with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that you'll be given the reward and be successful. فَلَيْسَتْ هَذِهِ الدُّنْيَا بِشَيْءٍ تَسُؤُكَ حِقْبَةً وَتَصُرُّ وَقْتًا وَغَايَتُهَا إِذَا فَكَّرْتَ فِيهَا كَفَيْئِكَ أَوْ كَحُلْمِكَ إِذَا حَلَمْتَ. He says, this world is nothing. And it's important. These two lines are important. Think about them. He says, this world is nothing. This whole world is nothing. فَلَيْسَتْ هَذِهِ الدُّنْيَا بِشَيْءٍ. This whole world is nothing. تَسُؤُكَ حِقْبَةً وَتَسُرُّ وَقْتًا. Sometimes you'll be happy in it, sometimes you'll be sad in it. This whole world is nothing. There'll be times when you're happy, there'll be times when you're sad. Just like Allah said in the Quran, تِلْكَ الْأَيَّامُ نُدَاوِلُهَا بَيْنَ النَّاسِ. Those are the days that we alternate between the people. Days of happiness and days of sadness. So this whole world is nothing, he says. You'll be sad on some days, you'll be happy on some days. وَغَايَتُهَا إِذَا فَكَّرْتَ فِيهَا. And the maximum this world is, the most this whole world is, when you think about it, كَفَيْئِكَ. It is just like your shadow. This whole world is just a shadow. أو كحلمك إذا حلمت. Or like a dream when you have a dream. It's nothing. It will just disappear like that. Your shadow, it's there. The sun moves, your shadow gone, disappeared. Chasing after your shadow, you'll never catch it. It's like a shadow, this whole world, it will go disappear. Or like a dream that you have and you wake up and it's gone. And one of the Salaf mentioned exactly that phrase. He said this whole world is like a dream. You see some nice things in that dream and then suddenly you wake up. It's gone. This whole world, you see some nice things in it and you chase after some nice things in it, and then in the click of a hand, in the blink of an eye, it's gone and the afterlife has begun. So he tells him, this whole world, فَلَيْسَتْ هَذِهِ الدُّنْيَا بِشَيْءٍ تسوءك حقبة وتصر وقتا وغايتها إذا فكرت فيها كفيئك أو كحلمك إذا حلمت سجنت بها وأنت لها محب فكيف تحب ما فيه سجنت. You have been imprisoned in this world and yet you love it. How can you love something when you are imprisoned in it? He says you have been imprisoned in this world but you love it. How can you be in love with something when you are in prison? You are in prison in it. Imprisoned. How can you love that? Nobody loves to be imprisoned. They want freedom. So this world, he says, Sujinta fiha o biha. You are imprisoned, shackled within it, and yet you love it. كيف تحب ما فيه سجنت. How can you love something that you are in prison inside of? وتطعمك الطعام وعن قريب ستطعم منك ما فيها طعمتا. That you now eat from this world, but very shortly it will eat from you what you used to eat from it. Meaning very shortly you will be buried and the ground will eat you up. And your body will be taken away and turned into dust. The ground will take your body away and eat you up. You are now eating from it. It will very shortly eat from you. So he's highlighting to him the reality of this world. And perhaps on that section is where we'll round off today. And we'll have a look at some of the remaining sections in another lecture. The plan is to maybe do one more, maximum two more, to finish off the rest of the poem. That's almost halfway now. That is approximately halfway of the poem. So maybe in the next lecture we'll summarize the rest of it, or we'll do one more after that to finish off the remaining lines, inshaAllah ta'ala. But that's where we'll round off on today, then up to that section. وصلى الله على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. Any questions or anything? Any questions?
Yeah.
If you always remind your sibling to pray but they refuse and do it late, should you tell your parents? It depends how old you are. If you are young siblings and one of your siblings isn't praying and they always do it late outside of the time, of course outside of the time, then it doesn't count like that. So if that's the case, then yes, you advise your sibling, you tell him again and again, explain to him, and if he refuses and he just doesn't do it, then tell your parents. Tell your parents so that your parents can advise him also. What do you advise a beginner who wants to seek knowledge? Where shall he go to study? Right now, if you're here in Sheffield, then you come to the Masjid to study. This is your place to study. Come to the mosque, come to the circles of knowledge. Bring your book, your pen, your pad. Attend the gatherings of knowledge and study and learn. Make your notes. Of course, we know in this time there's been a lot of disruption. But normally, inshaAllah, if we get back to a schedule soon, we have regular classes here every week. So if you are here, then you attend here at your masjid to seek the knowledge. If you're old enough and you are able to go abroad, then there are places. There is, of course, the University of Medina. If a person can get into there, that's something good. Is there a reward for memorizing hadith? When you memorize a hadith, the point of memorizing the hadith is to act upon it. And so when you act upon it, of course, you get reward. But even when you're memorizing the hadith, you are seeking knowledge, and seeking knowledge is an act of worship. So all of that has reward in it. You're memorizing hadith, that is seeking knowledge. Seeking knowledge is an act of worship, because you're seeking that knowledge to learn the Quran and the Sunnah to worship Allah better. So when you learn that hadith, then you practice that hadith, all of that has reward in it. And that's what they used to say, the Salaf, تَعَلَّمْنَا الْعِلْمَ وَالْعَمَلَ جَمِيعًا, that we learned knowledge and action together. They would learn a hadith and go and do it. Learn another hadith and go and practice it. So you learn the hadith and you practice it, and all of that has the reward in it. Keeping family ties. Who exactly does that mean? And does this mean visiting, calling, or just making dua? Keeping family ties, generally speaking, again, these days we have all the situation going on, but otherwise, generally, your family within your locality that are close by, then you visit them. Visit them when you are able to visit them. Call round, see them physically. Those who are far away, then you can keep ties via the means that are available, the phones and other methods these days. In the prayer where you recite the Quran quietly, does your takbir have to be loud? In the quiet prayers like Dhuhr and Asr, all of your prayer has to be loud, meaning you don't do any of it in your heart. In Dhuhr and Asr, when you're reciting your parts of the prayer, you have to be physically moving your lips and actually saying it. You don't just stand there in your heart thinking Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen in your heart. In the quiet prayers, you're supposed to be moving your lips and saying it. So the takbir, obviously you say that as well, Allahu Akbar. It is actually said verbally, and the rest of it you say it verbally, but very quietly only to yourself. Very quietly only to yourself, but you move your lips and say it. Anything else? In that case, we'll round off on that for today then, and inshallah ta'ala we'll arrange a date to finish off the rest of the poem in the future, inshallah. وصلى الله على نبينا محمد